Welcome to another episode of Arthritic Bourbon Bikers. We're here in the garage and we have
new digs.
So we thought, hey, if we're going to be social distancing,
Probably not 6 feet, but
not quite 6 feet, but I'll cough this way, that we should set up something and have a little bit better location to film in the garage. So we're still in the garage. You still might hear cars go by, birds chirping, all that stuff. But had some spare stuff laying around out there, and it's kind of dusty still. But we built this portable table and kind of got a place to kind of do a little recording out here. So you're the first break-in session of this set if you're watching on video. If you're not, you're listening on the podcast. So know that we're trying to change things up a bit. So what's the topic for the day? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I've been doing more thinking than actual riding. I've been thinking about things like carrying water. I was really impacted by that ride in Texas because there were some moments where I thought, I know I don't have enough water. And I'm not confident we're going to get where we need to be to get it. And the terrain was different. Out here you can ride 50 or 60 miles. But there, 15 miles is a tremendous hike. Yep. And so as the crow flies, you're not that far from the water, but to actually get there, it's a big deal. So I thought maybe it'd be good to talk a little bit about how you carry your water, how you decide how much you're gonna need, and maybe visit some things I've abandoned. Like I've considered never having a backpack on my bike because I just don't like it, and other means of carrying, like a bladder, things like that.
Yeah. It's definitely true. While we were out there, water becomes one of the greatest concerns, and you think about that, and if you're used to riding in other locations, you probably think, 3 liters of water sounds like a lot of water, it'll get you by. But there's a couple different things in the fact that we had situations out there where there wasn't water available for like a couple of days because we couldn't get as much distance as we originally thought. We might think we could easily ride 25 or 30 miles, but in that terrain, the riding 15 miles, 10 to 15 miles was pretty kind of an average day, I guess I'd say overall, because of the terrain, not just because it was technical, I guess is maybe the word.
Lots of pushing.
Yeah, times when you just had to hike the bike. Second thing is that majority of the things we were cooking with required in some way water to cook with as well. Not to mention your morning coffee and all those things that sometimes we might not take into consideration when we're planning out how much water we drink in a day. You might not think about, that 1.5 cups or 2 cups of water you use for coffee in the morning, or that 1 cup of water you use, or 3/4 of a cup of water you might use making your oatmeal, or whatever it is, drink mixes, whatever your thing is. You always wind up using, I think, more water than you anticipated. So that brings about just thinking about how do you carry water? How do you carry a lot of water? Where do you resupply water? What's your technique for resupplying water? And there's like a myriad of ways to do it. And it's bad, as we said, as any controversial subject out there. Everybody's got their opinion on what they think. Yeah. So what's the method you started with, I guess, to start with? And then when you say you abandoned some things that you originally thought and moved on to something else, what are your thoughts changing onto it?
I went through a period where I would carry 1 or 2 water bottles in a cage, and then I became infatuated with bags. I wanted different bags, and I wanted that space for other things, carrying my lock or a frame bag. And so I went from lots of water bottles to like a stock bottle, a liter and a half Nalgene, whatever, and I thought, okay, what I could do then is if I need electrolyte solution, I'll mix it up on the fly or whatever, stop and cook with it. And now I'm starting to drift back because I don't know, I just realized that I don't always want to take the time to stop and mix and pour. So I'd like to have them ahead of time. So that puts me back to other water bottles, which means I need other cages. So I've got them all over the bike now. I'm trying to decide if I really like that because they have to be accessible, right?
Yep.
We were just having a conversation about guys that use bladders and maybe put them in a backpack or something, or in a frame bag. I had never considered that because I don't like backpacking, and so I've kind of not considered that. Maybe I'm going to drift into that lane.
Yeah, there's been a lot of recent articles I've been reading where folks have their own philosophy, and a lot of it depends on the type of riding you do. These are more what I would consider people who do world touring style stuff. So we're talking about guys who are loading up their bikes and they're traveling around the world continuously riding and touring. There are times, the article that I was reading was talking about how there are times where you don't, like depending on the geography that you're in, you may or may not need more water, sometimes more than others. And he was talking about, this particular author was talking about his philosophy about how to minimize what he had to carry when he didn't need it, but having the ability then to maximize it if he was in a dry or desert area where he was going to need water or it wasn't as readily available. And his methodology was such that normally he was carrying about 3 liters worth of water in bottles, and then he was supplementing the rest of his water reservoir carrying capacity with bladders. And he could carry up to, I think it was somewhere around a total of 15, 17 liters, something like that total, which is a lot of water.
Sounds like a ton.
It's a lot of weight too, as we were talking about. The interesting part about it was that just that flexibility, and that's what kind of spoke to me a little bit. So when we started talking about this particular episode, maybe talking about water carrying and things like that, the bottles are convenient, but they're hard to manipulate and have all over the bike. Yeah. And the bladder, what this guy's philosophy is that he would dedicate his entire frame bag to bladders of water. And then when he didn't need it, they compressed down to nothing, relatively speaking. And then he could, have the ability to get to another location for supply. And he just talked about how he used that as his method to minimize the amount of stuff he had to kind of keep up with on his bike. Because we were talking earlier, cages and bottles and stuff, depending on the terrain, some of the terrain's pretty rough and bumpy. Yeah. Those things will come out.
Yeah, they'll fly, yeah.
So it's something to consider maybe is how you carry your water. I know a lot of guys like to carry the backpack with the water, system in it, the bladders on their back. I've never been a fan of that either because especially in hot weather around here, it's miserable to have that thing on your back.
Yeah, just sticking to you. That's part of the reason I don't like to backpack. Even in college, I'd carry a bag and I just didn't like it, It's probably why it's bad for your back, but I'd carry it on one shoulder or something else because I just didn't like that. But it makes sense to put it there up high, and I'm sure it's efficient. But maybe I would consider that though if I'm going on that kind of a tour where you've got to have that kind of flexibility. And I face that even more now. We've talked about how water's not as available right now because places are closed down during the pandemic, and so I carry more water on my bike than I used to on the average ride. Even in that, where I might have just a couple liters, I'm still rearranging how I'm carrying those. But it's heavy. That's why I prefer to be able to replenish because, I was just looking at that as 17 pounds. If that guy had 17 liters, that's 35 plus pounds
of water. Yeah.
And where are you going to put it? I mean, you already have gear. You've got a tent and all kinds of stuff, and that's if you're not carrying things for cameras and things to kind of, take video of, and that's just a ton.
Right.
So it's a real compromise. Something's got to go.
Yeah, you're always going to have something, taking up weight, and water is one of the biggest that you can adjust depending on where you're at. And we've talked about when you're out in locations where you have access to water, even if you're not sure if it's clean, you've always got the option to use a Sawyer squeeze or some kind of a filter to filter water. That's always an option as well, but none of these are really what I would call super convenient. So one of the things you talked about was your concern was having to refill things all the time. It's true. If you're even using a bladders or whatever, most of them you're going to have to probably stop and refill out of one thing into another. And I know a lot of them have the sort of the tube that you can come up and drink out of, but I think most people like to have something they can just sort of sip out of throughout the day. Yeah. Not everybody's going to use the tubes, and they're not convenient if they're in a frame bag and all that stuff sometimes. So even though most of them have a tube slot or whatever.
It's probably more sanitary too if you use that big thing as just your reservoir, and then multiple people can fill out of it in a pinch. I would think about that, especially now we're talking about infection control and things.
Right.
I wanted to ask your thought about insulated containers because, when it's hot, I've accepted the fact I'm not going to have a cold beverage unless I can stop somewhere. So I don't need an insulated water bottle for that. So I'm okay. And honestly, you can then probably have a larger volume of water if you just get just reuse your clear water bottles from the store or something, the smart water bottles or something.
That's what I kind of prefer. I think the smart water bottles are good. I've been using an Under Armour, sort of like a sports bottle, only because it has a push button top, so you can hit this button and the cap flips open. And it's purely for the sanitary function of not having to touch the lid with my hands, because if I'm out riding, especially in this time with all the virus stuff, my objective is to not, everyone tells you with the CDC stuff, don't touch your mouth, your eyes, your nose, keep your hands away from it. So I was using this Under Armour sports bottle that you can hit this button and the top flips open, and in fact it's right there if you want to grab it in that bag.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, but so I've been using something just like this sports bottle, and this is not quite a liter, it's a little under a liter, but you can just press the button and the top flips open, and it's not insulated or anything, and then I just refill it out of my other bottles. But I kind of prefer to have just cheap bottles, honestly. Most of the ones I use are those smart water bottle, 1 liter smart water bottles or something like that.
So what I use, the lid's kind of cracked, but this I like because it doesn't have a straw. The straws go in those bottles, they're always losing them or something.
Yeah, this just has more of just an open tube at the top that you can drink out of, screw on top, and it snaps, and then it has a lock that you can lock it closed if you want to, although it's pretty secure like it is, but if you were riding somewhere where there was a lot of bouncing or jostling, it's fine. But like I said, it's not real big. It doesn't hold as much as a 1 liter smart water. It's less than a liter in size, but I use it for, mixing drink mixes, because I like that stuff. Sometimes I feel like I need a little zip of energy. I can put one of those caffeinated drink mixes in and chug some of that. That seems to be helpful. So that way I save my other bottles for just clear water. And sometimes you don't want that drink mix. Sometimes you just want a clean drink of water.
Just water, yeah.
So you need something kind of separated.
Yeah,
so
sometimes they seem sweet.
Yeah, sometimes they're too sugary
too
or taste too sweet or whatever. But I don't really usually carry an insulated unless, like, if I'm out in the morning and I want to take a ride with coffee, I'll throw this in there sometimes with the snap lid just to keep my coffee in there. But other than that, I don't normally ride with an insulated mug.
Well, there's something else that's kind of a cold weather thing too. You think about here, we have stretches of time where, if you're out long enough, your water will freeze. So it's another thing about the insulated things. I don't spend that much time in the cold.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is something to think about, I guess. We don't normally have that much of an issue because we don't normally, again, spend that much time in the cold, but you do have to think about that. I know that there were times when we've been out and it's been close to cold or freezing temperatures that I've brought the water bottles in the tent with me. Just a little bit of insulation, even right there with your body heat, will keep usually something from freezing most of the time, but not always. This is something you got to think about, though.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've seen a bunch of folks on Instagram that are taking multi-day camping trips in the cold, and that thought kind of makes me shiver thinking about it because I'm a little bit of a baby now. They talk about melting snow and things, and I don't know that I would spend much time.
Yeah, it's not necessarily how I like to ride. In fact, we were just talking about that even when the weather's gotten a little bit chilly, 40 degrees, 43 degrees, I'm kind of like, ooh, I don't want to have to put gear on. Get lazy during that time of year and stuff, and don't want to have to put stuff on. So it's kind of part of it. But I think, there are so many options out there for water as far as ways to carry it and store it. It's the bladders tend to become a popular thing. My only concern about those things, traditionally I've carried water in Nalgene bottles on the forks in anything cages or wide foot cages and things like that. And that's something we should talk about sometimes, do a podcast on cages even. But I've carried Nalgenes, and I love those things because I just don't worry about them. The Nalgene bottles are so tough. I've got one that's just beat up and the labels are all worn off of it and the lid's got a little melted spot on it, which I have no idea how that even happened, but it did. It's just, and it's still, they just don't leak. And that's the thing, when I think about bladders, that's the thing that I think about is, what if it leaks?
Yeah, I guess that's true, yeah.
So you have to be prepared for that. And all of the guys who have had frame bags out there, you all know that if you have one that isn't completely waterproof and it does get damp inside, it takes forever for that to dry.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
So this, Ortley bag up here on the wall is waterproof, completely waterproof. And I've never had anything get wet inside. But to think about the fact if a water bladder was to leak in
Waterproof from the inside out,
it's waterproof on the inside too. So you're talking about a swimming pool in there, basically. So anything you have in there with it, of course, I guess if you're carrying water in there, maybe that's about the only thing you're going to put in it because that's where the majority of your weight's going to be. But you would want to be cautious about putting other stuff in there. Like don't put your food in there with a water bladder because I would just be concerned they might leak or whatever.
Put your tortillas in there with the water.
There are numerous companies that are making those bladders. I know Platypus and lots of different people. Everybody and their brother has the water bladder bags out there. I don't have much experience with them recently. The last time I ever used one was just on a camping trip years ago. And I didn't have any trouble with it, but...
Yeah, I think I'm going to experiment with them at some point.
Yeah, and I know I've heard some people talk about that some of the water bladders, they've kind of felt like left a taste to the water a little bit. Yeah. It's the other thing about Nalgene's or... I never pick up any taste out of those. I know some people don't like the plasticky bottles, even though Nalgene's are supposed to be, is it BPA free or whatever they call it. Some people like the clean canteen bottles, the metal ones, They're expensive though. I mean, they're talking those 1 liter size, I think is about $35. That's more expensive than Nalgene's. Yeah. But they look cool and they're tough and
they probably don't gather the scratches and stuff that Nalgene does. They get all scratched, even from your hardware in the bike. They get, and maybe that just adds to the rugged nature of the rig.
It's kind of the character of it. But yeah, you're right. They probably weather a little better and maybe they, I don't know. I guess I don't know if it makes any difference temperature-wise of the water that's in them. Nalgene versus stainless steel. I guess the stainless steel would probably pick up the temperature a little bit faster, but there's probably not much difference. Yeah. But it's like you said, when you're riding, you just got to kind of take what you can get temperature-wise. You're not going to have a crispy cold drink when you arrive to some location. If it's 95 degrees outside, it's going to be lukewarm water, basically, So you got to deal with that, but... Yeah, so I don't know. Water's a difficult thing to figure out how you're going to carry it all and what
and what you're going to need.
I think that's probably the hardest part. So if you're in the type of riding you're doing, if you're world touring, you have to be able to be flexible.
Yeah, it's one other thing. Let's say, I'm a little bit medical minded because of this, because of my day job, right? But this all assumes you don't have to irrigate a wound or you didn't have to rinse something out of your eye, because you could easily go through a liter in a first aid situation.
Not to mention, we've all been on bike rides where it was muddy, and you had something in the drivetrain.
Yeah,
and you had to rinse somehow. Worst case scenario, you want to minimize having to use your clean drinking water to rinse something. But if your gear's breaking down, you might not have a choice. But again, I guess if it's that muddy, there's bound to be water somewhere.
That's a good point.
You're going to have water somewhere. So with a water filter, even though you don't want to run muddy water through them if you don't have to, but we use the Sawyer squeezes out in Texas, and I was impressed with how they work. It's not fast.
No.
It can't be in a hurry, but I mean, really, it wasn't slow either. It wasn't like you were waiting hours for your water to drip through something. I mean, you got to really kind of roll the sheet and squeeze it through the filter. But
the only thing that I found to be a little bit of an issue was, because as far as cross-contamination, you don't want to submerge it in something necessarily, because then the outside is in contact with the water that's not filtered. And you need a fair bit of flow. So if you're at a real slow-running spring, you've got to really kind of have a way to get that in there, and then you're still getting it on the outside of the thing, So it was actually a little bit of technical issue there.
Yeah, you're trying to avoid cross-contamination and sometimes that's kind of hard. But worst case scenario, even they have the straws that you can stick on there and stick the thing down in the water and drink right through it, the life straws and all that kind of stuff. And those things really, while they don't filter viruses, which is a big thing now, I don't think most people worry about getting viruses. You're most worried about, the other nasties that are going to hurt the body. The virus stuff, okay, maybe. And Sawyer now makes a product to address that. So basically what it is it's a bottle, kind of like this, only it's a squishy bottle, squeezes. And inside is this like cartridge thing that's kind of like a sponge. And you fill it with water, and it has then a filter on the top too, one of these Sawyer filters on the top. And you squeeze the bottle, and it forces the water through this spongy material that kills the viruses. I don't know how it does that, but then you squeeze it out of you put the filter on the top, then you squeeze it out of there through the filter into the drinking bottle you're going to use. And the spongy thing that's inside is good for like 400 containers, which it's about this size, it looks like, of water. 400 uses, basically.
Okay.
For the virus part.
Yeah.
Now, we all know the Sawyer squeeze is supposed to be good for 100,000 gallons.
Yeah, you can't.
It's crazy.
Yeah, can't imagine using.
It would take you years. I mean, as much as most people use them, it would take you years to use 100,000 gallons of actual water through one of those
filtered
things.
water. Yeah.
And as long as if it starts to act up, you're supposed to back flush them. Which it's important to remember that if you're back flushing a Sawyer squeeze, you want to back flush with filtered water.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not obvious to everyone, but you definitely don't want to use dirty water to back flush your filter with. So, I mean, that's something they kind of highlight on their material as well, is be sure to clean and back flush your filter with the clean water, not, used water. So there's so many options out there. Back in the day when I would do backpacking hiking trip, we had one of the squeeze pump ones in the early days, and it was the one I used was from Pure, the company PUR. It had like an iodine matrix filter in it, and you'd plop this little rubber. It had a rubber hose, and you'd plop this little thing with a floater in your water source, and it would draw from that, and you'd just sit there and squeeze this thing. And on the other end was a charcoal filter to kind of help remove tastes. Mm-hmm. And it would just kind of like pump this thing, and it was squirting out clean water on the other end. But, the problem with that was that thing was it's probably 20 years ago now, and you couldn't buy the filters for them anymore. In other words, they had changed the product over time, and those filters were no longer available. So you have this device that's no longer usable. Yeah. But practically speaking, you can't beat the size and weight of the Sawyer squeeze and how easy it is to use.
Yeah, how affordable.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, they're really affordable.
A lot of bikepacking people. Well, if you guys are familiar with Ryan Van Duzer, if you watch his channel, he just uses iodine tablets. He doesn't have a filter at all.
Okay.
That's his thing. And his thing is that, he spent a fair amount of time in Honduras on mission trips, and he was with the Peace Corps, and that's what they trained them to do, was to use iodine tablets. And so that's what he continues to do to this day, is because he says it's light, it's small, he carries a little container, throw a tablet in there, shake it up, wait 30 minutes or whatever the time is for it to kill off everything in there, and that's what he does. So everybody's got their thing. Iodine's still a very viable and popular thing, and it's going to work if you follow the dosage.
Yeah.
One tablet for 16 ounces, I think, or something like that. So those are still popular too, just carry a little.
Yeah. I've never used
little round glass thing, and some people, I've not used it much either. I mean, the closest thing was that iodine matrix filter, but that had a charcoal filter to filter out taste, because some people say iodine leaves a taste in the water a little bit. But I guess if you want safe drinking water, and if anybody follows Van Duzer, he just kind of went through, before all of this nonsense with the virus, he was in Mexico, doing the Baja Divide a little bit, so that's what he was using down there. The most important thing is don't trust water sources.
Yeah.
So perfect example, when we're in Big Bend, we're riding along, and we're trying to get to this spring location where there's a water source, and it's a spring water, and you're thinking, oh yeah, cool, it comes out of comes out of the ground. There's a spring. But the problem is right before we get there, we see a herd of wild donkeys.
Yeah.
And they're hanging around this water source, because it's a water source in the middle of the desert. And these donkeys don't care where they take a dump, where they take a leak.
Yeah.
So, and you don't know the start of the spring necessarily, because it's running through the mountains there. So you don't know if upstream they're up there taking a dump and all this stuff. And that's how these things happen, right?
Yeah,
that animals or humans.
Right.
There's some crazy individuals out there that do things they shouldn't do as well. They're defecating in the water somewhere upstream, it flows down, and you drink the water and you get some nasty bug.
Yeah. And you're already in a situation with not much water to rehydrate yourself.
Yeah, and then you're going to be bailing off the bike and using up all your toilet paper if you brought it in.
If you remember to bring it.
If you remember to bring it. It's just a whole other story sometimes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think water sources, though, carrying water is a big deal. Staying hydrated is important, and so figuring out your water carrying situation's a deal, of course, but you just got to figure out what works for you, I think. And I think maybe it's one of those things that it's just going to change depending on how you're riding and where you're riding and what you're doing. For what we're doing around here, throwing some water bottles and some cages on there, maybe that's good enough for what you do.
Yeah, yeah. Even though we're kind of stuck here, I'm still kind of dreaming about some long trips and some exotic places. That may or may not have some. I want to go back to the desert. I would love to go to New Mexico and ride down there and camp. But
yeah,
I we're landlocked for a while.
I would love to hear what other people's water carrying solutions are too. So if you have things that you're doing, what works for you for carrying large amounts of water, or what's your daily driver style water carrying solution on your bike? Leave us comments or whatever. I'd like to know what everybody else is doing, but for us, it's kind of been, we've kind of moved around between cages and bottles. We like the feed bags. I'm a fan of those, the Revelate feed bags, just to be able to put bottles in, but they're also good for snacks and all kinds of things. We've done Nalgene's and different fork cages and hauled and refilled. We've done it different ways.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious to hear some input about the Bladders, different creative solutions to put those in and decide if you're on a long trip and you don't need it anymore. Is it how easy is it to store? Do you need to dry it out so it doesn't get moldy? I don't know anything about that. So
yeah, I have little experience with the Bladders. Like I said, I don't know what the long-term cleaning, drying, using, leaks, not leaks. What do you like? What do you not like? I'd love to hear what people think about that. It is an interesting alternative, and certainly putting it in a frame bag would be nice from the perspective of having it centralized weight-wise in the bike. I think that's kind of a cool idea. Yeah. But I know a lot of guys, especially mountain bike guys, they wear the little, what's the brand that everybody's using?
Oh,
I can't think
of it. I can't remember now.
Anyway.
You mentioned Platypus as well.
Platypus was one, but that's not the company I'm thinking of. But anyway, everybody out there will remember the brand that I can't think of. But they wear these little backpacks, and then they might throw some snacks in it
Camelback.
too. Camelback, that's it. Okay. They might put some snacks in there and stuff too, but a lot of those guys wear those backpacks because they don't have racks and stuff on their mountain bikes. They're just doing day trips and stuff like that. So I understand that that's a good solution for them, because talk about jumping and bouncing and around. I mean, we were watching some video last night when these guys are doing crazy stuff. And so they can't have all that stuff on their bike. They're not touring though. Yeah. So maybe that's, again, it comes down to use case. What are you doing with your stuff? Our stuff has all been mainly touring. So
yeah.
Anyway, anything else on that?
No, I don't think so. It doesn't take long to exhaust my knowledge of that.
No, it's true, because we're just trying different things and trying to share what we've done and tried and what we liked and didn't like. So whatever you can share that you've done and tried and liked and didn't like and why you chose what you chose is important. And I guess, like we said, it comes down to how everybody is using their bike. Our stuff has always been, most of the time, honestly, we've always had access to some water or sources or whatever, even if it meant pulling over at a convenience store and buying a bottle of water. But most convenience stores even will let you come in and refill water bottles and stuff. Yeah. So that really hasn't normally been a problem. And on the trails, a lot of the trails we ride, there's water sources along them, just open a spigot and access to clean water. Texas was our first experiment with not having access to water and it being harder to find than we anticipated.
Yeah.
That was one of the issues there. So anyway, thanks for watching. This will be on YouTube. It's on Anchor. They distribute it to lots of different podcasts. Leave us a review if you haven't. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, subscribe. We'll have more stuff coming out. Appreciate you following along, and we'll see you again soon.